Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. I'm Eileen, your moderator for today. We are pleased to welcome you to our Dhamma sharing titled The Three Parts of Mental Experiences on our Klang and Coast Buddhist Association Facebook page live. Please help us to click like and share our Facebook page. If you have any questions, please post your comments on our Facebook and we will read out your questions during the Q&A sessions later. Please do allow me to give a brief introduction about Brother Billy Tan, our distinguished speaker for today. Brother Billy Tan is a retired business development consultant, certified as Master Practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, clinical hypnotherapist, laughter yoga teacher, and laughter ambassador. In sharing the Dhamma, Brother Billy studied under the late Venerable Dr. M. Punaji Mahathera and has delivered Dhamma sharing throughout Peninsular Malaysia. In recent years, Brother Billy has shared the Dhamma extensively in the Philippines as resident Dhamma lecturer at Wisdom Park, Manila, as well as to Catholic seminary students, universities, theosophical societies, and also to inmates at the women's prison in Metro Manila. Without further delay, I would like to hand over the session to Brother Billy Tan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sister Eileen. Thank you to the Committee of Klang and Coast Buddhist Association for inviting me. Very happy to offer this sharing today. Let me put up my PowerPoint screen. Okay. All right, the topic is the three parts of mental experiences, basically exploring the mind. And this is based on what my late teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji Mahathera, has taught us during the sutta classes and the meditation retreats. So I'll be using a lot of his translations and explanations. Just a quick word about the sharing today. The question is there a thinker doing the thinking? So we're going to explore this. And the important thing is that the Buddha used three words to describe what we call mind. And this is really a scientific exploration of body and mind leading to our behavior and also our experience of dukkha, suffering. This is not a spiritual exploration, so I'm not going to go deep into the spiritual aspects of the mind. This is basically a scientific exploration from a very down-to-earth, practical perspective. This is actually the first in three parts sharing. The next 2 weeks, there will be 2 more sharings, and together they make up this complete set, this series, where it leads to us having a good understanding of what dukkha and how it affects us, and how we can actually learn to relieve ourselves of the suffering of dukkha. This is not aimed at trying to make anyone becoming enlightened, but basically just trying to be more peaceful, more happy, and so that life is not as suffering as what we hoped it would not be, so that we can enjoy life a little bit more without getting involved in too much of sensual pleasures and sensual indulgences. Basically, all this is from an experiential perspective. We're not talking about existential. Existential means you basically look at objects and look at it and try to make sure that it is something you can feel, you can touch. Mind is not something you can touch or feel physically. It is an activity. You can only experience it. That's why I call it three parts of mental experiences. So basically, when we talk about this sensual world, we are really organisms in an environment. And as organisms in an environment, we're experiencing the environment. So the first thing that is happening in this body is really the fact that there is a process called metabolism that is keeping us alive. Without metabolism, we are dead. So without the body, we cannot experience in the sensual world, the karma bhava. And of course, in experiencing the environment, we have consciousness so that we're able to experience the environment through our sense organs by being able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. These five physical senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touch, together with the mental realm, that is cognition, these are all described by the Buddha in the 5 aggregates, Panchakanda. So basically, we're organisms in an environment. I'm not trying to talk about whether we exist or don't exist, or whether there is a self or there is no self. Look at it from an experiential perspective, that we are just organisms in an environment. We are experiencing life, and we're experiencing the environment through the consciousness and awareness of objects around us. So let's take a look at mind as an activity. You see, the mind is not an entity. So there are two words we have to be clear about. An entity is an object you can touch, you can feel, you can actually smell it, you can come into contact with it. It is a physical object. That is called an entity. So your cell phone is an entity, your car is an entity, even the physical body is an entity. But mind is not an entity, it's an activity. And this is actually the activity of the brain, the central nervous system, and various parts of the body. A lot of people think that, mind is only up there in the brain. No, that is not correct. Mind involves the entire body. Without the rest of the body, there is no such thing as mind, because the Buddha used 3 words to describe mind, and one of the words, vijnana, is about perception, perceiving the environment. So without your eyes, without your hands touching, and without your nose smelling, your ear hearing, or your tongue tasting, you cannot experience the environment, and there is no mind, right? So basically, mind is an activity of a lot of activity in the brain, but also the rest of the body. That is really what mind is. Without the body in this karma loka, in this karma sensual world, then we will not be able to experience the environment. So let's begin with that first question. Very interesting. Is there a thinker, right, doing all the thinking? Now I'm going to show you a video that is a bit long. It's about almost 8 or 9 minutes long. Don't worry about the length of the video. Just watch through it. I'm going to break the video down into smaller parts after this, and part by part we will discuss the notion, is there a thinker to do the thinking? So this is done by my teacher, Bhante Punaji, in a dialogue with Uncle Vijaya.
We need a thinker to think. Is that the question? Do we need a thinker to think? Existentialism.
No, this is another kind of question where we have to get into a different way of thinking. The important thing is we have to understand that we have no thing called a mind. We only have a thing called a body. And what we call the mind, the Buddha used 3 words to refer to what is called the mind. Chitta, Mano, and Vijnana. These are the 3 things. And if we examine what these 3 things are, these are 3 activities of the body. There are 3 activities of the body that we refer to as mind. One is Vijnana. Vijnana simply means that we have in this body 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself. These senses, when stimulated by the environment,
Contact.
the senses react to that stimulus. That reaction is what is called vijnana. Chakku vijnana, the eye reacting. Sota vijnana, the ear reacting. Gana vijnana, nose reacting. Jivha vijnana, tongue reacting. And kaya vijnana, the body reacting. That reaction is the main thing that we call vijnana. Today it is translated as consciousness, which is not correct. It is really perception, not consciousness, perception. Now, during the time of the Buddha, someone came and asked the Buddha a question. We have these 5 senses, and each sense will give different information. The eye, the information we get from the eye is different from the information we get from the ear. It is a sound. And nose gives another kind of information. The tongue gives another kind of information. Now these different informations, they are different. But we mix these things together. Where does that mixing come? Where do they unite?
In the mind.
Then the Buddha said, Mano. Mano is the place. And today, if we use the modern scientific thinking, all these information going from the senses go to the brain. And the brain begins to do the thinking. Put that information together and compare it with the past experiences and gives a meaning. So when I see a person coming here, if I have seen that person before, I will know that person. Or if I don't, at least I will see whether it is a man or a woman, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So the meaning is given by the thinking part, which is mano, which is the activity of the brain. There is no thinker as a separate person. It is the brain, and there is a part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, which is doing the thinking. And mano really is not another person there or anything, but the body itself. The brain is a part of the body.
So that if you cut off somebody's head, the brain is there, but there's no mind. It stops.
And then the other thing is, once you have given a meaning to what you saw, an emotion is aroused. That means you like that thing that you saw, or you hate that, or you are frightened of that, or you are worried about that. These are the emotions. And that emotional part is what the Buddha called chitta. So chitta is the emotional part, and according to the emotion that is aroused, an action takes place in the form of speech or behavior. And that is what is called karma. Karma is the action that goes. And the action can also have results, which may be, if you become angry and you begin to fight with people, other people might fight with you also. Or you might be taken to prison. These are the effects. Yeah. So those are the consequences of the action. So that is the vipaka. So all these things are just the body doing these things. There is no person or any mind as a separate thing that is doing anything.
Now, the Buddha used 3 words to describe the mind, and that's why we call them 3 parts of mental experiences. First word is vijnana. Vijnana is referring to the process of perception. That means being able to perceive objects in the environment. That is through our sense organs. So we become aware of an object. We don't know the meaning yet, because in this process of perception, we are just aware there is an object. The meaning is given by Mano. So when the mind has this mental image of an object that is perceived through the sense organs, Mano automatically searches through the memory and produces a name. And this process is called papancha. It is really trying to identify what was perceived. And what was perceived arises in the mind in the form of a mental image. And that is the rupa, the appearance of a rupa in the mind. And then a label or a name was given to identify it, because the brain automatically searches through memory to produce this name if it is something similar to what has been seen before. So that is the Dhamma, the name that is given to the perceived object. At the same time, we are experiencing the environment through our senses. So we begin to cognize this experience, and this cognition of the experience. So this experience itself, that we become aware that we are now experiencing the environment, this experience is called the Dhamma. This is not referring to the Buddha Dhamma, because the Buddha Dhamma is spelled with a capital D. When you see the word Dhamma spelled with a small d, it is really referring to experience. And along with this experience, we begin to create concepts, ideas. And along with these ideas, we begin to create choices. So when we see something that is pleasant, we now have a choice. Do we want it or we don't want it? So if we see something that is unpleasant, do we want to get rid of it or do we want to leave it alone? So choices comes up. At the same time, the chitta is happening at the same time. Now, all these three are happening simultaneously. It's not like one after another in different steps. It's not. At the same time, the chitta is experiencing the feeling, the vedana of what was perceived. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neither pleasant nor unpleasant? And then the chitta triggers a reaction. And this reaction is an emotional reaction. And that is called tanha. So tanha is really an emotional reaction. Now I will explain this emotional reaction called tanha in more details in the next sharing when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, because that will be explained very thoroughly in the first and the second Noble Truth. So I'll leave that aside. We won't go deep into the explanation of tanha. So meanwhile, basically the chitta triggers this reaction, the tanha, and reacting to feelings, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And this leads to mood and temperament. Mood means our feeling, whether we feel good or we don't feel good about it. Temperament means there is an emotional urge to want to do something. There's an urge. And all these will lead to our karma, actually. If we were to react, then we are producing karma. And basically, whatever experience that we have, this chitta also leads to this clinging or personalizing the experience. And this word upadana, this is translated as clinging, grasping, attaching, but Bhante Punnaji actually calls it more accurately as personalizing. Because if whatever we experience, we tend to personalize it and say, I feel this, I like this, and I am seeing this, I am seeing that, I am hearing this, I am hearing that. There is this I, notion of I, that is always arising because we personalize it. It comes from the word upadana. Upadana actually comes from two Pali terms, upa and adana. Upa means internal, inwards. Adana is the opposite of dana. What is dana? Dana is giving. Adana is taking. So upa adana means taking it inside. Therefore, it is personalizing, bringing it in and say, oh, this is mine, this is me. I like it, I don't like it, right? So, and therefore, this leads to mood and temperament. And we react. So this is the activity of the chitta. So these are the three words that the Buddha has used to describe the mind. The Buddha never used just only one word. But in instances where there was a reference to mind in general, normally the word chitta is being used. But do be aware, in many sutras where the word chitta appears, it actually refers to the emotions. And I will explain this a bit more when in the next sharing when we talk about the Four Noble Truths. But for this sharing, let's just suffice to describe that these are the three parts of mental experiences we call mind. Because we have this body, because of the central nervous system, all the sense organs are connected through these nerves, bringing the nerve to the brain through the spinal cord, entering the brain, and the brain processing all the signals coming in from various organs, the nerves that are carrying signals from the organs. So the brain evolved over millions of years. All the nerves coming into the body enter through the brain stem. And it is in the brain stem that is responsible for a lot of involuntary functions of our organs: digestion, respiration, heart rate, blood pressure, and so on. So that's why the brain stem is called the survival brain. As the signal enters through the brain, it passes through the limbic system. So the limbic system is the first part of the brain that actually processes signals coming from the nerves. And then the signals go to the cerebral cortex, our thinking brain. And then only when it reaches the cerebral cortex, then we become consciously aware of something. And this conscious awareness is leading to our ability to learn, to think, and to decide. So that's why the cerebral cortex is called the learning brain. But in the limbic system, when it senses these signals from the sense organs, there is a part of the brain called the amygdala that senses whether it is a threat, and it starts to react to it. So let's look at this process called the process of perception, the first thing, where it arises, and then we become aware of objects in the environment.
The Buddha used three words to refer to what is called the mind: Chitta, Mano, and Vijnana. These are the three things. And if we examine what these three things are, these are three activities of the body. There are three activities of the body that we refer to as mind. One is Vijnana. Vijnana simply means that we have in this body five senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself. These senses, when stimulated by the environment, the senses react to that stimulus. That reaction is what is called Vijnana. Chakku Vijnana, the eye reacting. Sota Vijnana, the ear reacting. Gana Vijnana, nose reacting. Jivha Vijnana, tongue reacting. And Kaya Vijnana, the body reacting. That reaction is the main thing that we call Vijnana. Today it is translated as consciousness, which is not correct. It is really perception, not consciousness, perception.
So Bhante was talking about the various sense organs. From the eye, the optic nerves carry the signal into the brain to be processed. Then we have ear, the auditory nerves, and we have the nose, the tongue, and the body, carrying these signals to the brain to be processed. And this whole process leads to the awareness of objects in the environment. This awareness is the perception of what was perceived through the sense organs. That is the vijnana. So they bring in, and then now inside this processing of the brain, we become aware. Right? This awareness is the result of the activities going on in the brain by reacting to the signals coming from the body, from the sense organs. When light enters the eye, reflected light entering the eye, it stimulates the light-sensitive cells on the retina, and that signal produces a mental image called the rupa. In the same way, we have sound entering the ear. Sound is basically air vibrations. striking on the eardrum, vibrating the eardrum, and as a result, the auditory nerves carry these impulses into the brain, and then we become aware of sound. Same way, aware of smell, taste, and then touch, when the body comes into contact with tangible objects. All these really form perceptions. Now, these perceptions are independent in the sense that each one is the result of the activity of a specific group of organs, a group of sense organs. There are two eyes, that's why I say it's a group, it's not just one eye. Of course, for people with eye defect, they might only have one working eye, but basically two eyes. In the same way with the body, when we touch something, there are many different types of touch receptors. And the whole body, the entire skin, is actually a sense organ of tangible objects. So Bande mentioned that the word vijnana really should be called perception, not consciousness. Right? So therefore we have eye perception coming in from the eye, and then we have ear perception, which is sound, nose perception, the smells, tongue perception, and body perception. Now, one of the reasons why there is this statement where Bande pointed out it is perception and not consciousness is because this word vijnana was translated 200 years ago. It started by Rice Davids. And basically 200 years ago, when they translated, they were using common language, common terms. But since then, right, the field of psychology, the field of medicine, the field of neuroscience have advanced, and they have very specific meaning assigned to certain words like perception and consciousness. So the word consciousness today, if you were to ask a psychologist or a neuroscientist, it carries a very specific meaning. Consciousness really refers to the sense of self as well. So in other words, today when you talk to scientists, when you talk about consciousness, they're not just talking about being aware of objects, they are talking about being aware of a self in the world. So the word consciousness is a lot more complex and deeper than when it was first thought to be used. So a more accurate word to describe what is vijnana coming from the sense organ would be perception, perceiving objects in the environment through the sense organs. Right. So now let's take a look at the second part of the mental experience called Mano, the cognitive process.
Someone came and asked Buddha a question. We have these 5 senses, and each sense will give different information. The eye, the information we get from the eye is different from the information we get from the ear. It is a sound. And nose gives another kind of information. The tongue gives another kind of information. Now these different informations, they are different. But we mix these things together. Where does that mixing come? Where do they unite?
In the mind.
Then the Buddha said, Mano. Mano is the place. And today, if we use the modern scientific thinking, all these information going from the senses go to the brain. And the brain begins to do the thinking, put that information together and compare it with the past experiences and gives a meaning. So when I see a person coming here, if I have seen that person before, I will know that person. Or if I don't, at least I will see whether it is a man or a woman, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So the meaning is given by the thinking part, which is Mano, which is the activity of the brain. There is no thinker as a separate person. It is the brain, and there is a part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, which is doing the thinking. And Mano really is not another person there or anything, but the body itself. The brain is a part of the body.
So Bhante was talking about the various sense organs. From the eye, the optic nerves carry the signal into the brain to be processed. Then we have ear, the auditory nerves, and we have the nose, the tongue, and the body, carrying these signals to the brain to be processed. And this whole process leads to the awareness of objects in the environment. This awareness is the perception of what was perceived through the sense organs. That is the vijnana. So they bring in, and then now inside this processing of the brain, we become aware. Right? This awareness is the result of the activities going on in the brain by reacting to the signals coming from the body, from the sense organs. When light enters the eye, reflected light entering the eye, it stimulates the light-sensitive cells on the retina, and that signal produces a mental image called the rupa. In the same way, we have sound entering the ear. Sound is basically air vibrations, striking on the eardrum, vibrating the eardrum, and as a result, the auditory nerves carry these impulses into the brain, and then we become aware of sound. Same way, aware of smell, taste, and then touch, when the body comes into contact with tangible objects. All these really form perceptions. Now, these perceptions are independent in the sense that each one is the result of the activity of a specific group of organs, a group of sense organs. There are two eyes, that's why I say it's a group, it's not just one eye. Of course, for people with eye defect, they might only have one working eye, but basically two eyes. In the same way with the body, when we touch something, there are many different types of touch receptors. And the whole body, the entire skin, is actually a sense organ of tangible objects. So Bhante mentioned that the word vijnana really should be called perception, not consciousness. Right? So therefore, we have eye perception coming in from the eye, and then we have ear perception, which is sound, nose perception, the smells, tongue perception, and body perception. Now, one of the reasons why there is this statement where Bhante pointed out it is perception and not consciousness is because this word vijnana was translated 200 years ago. It started by Rice Davids. And basically 200 years ago, when they translated, they were using common language, common terms. But since then, right, the field of psychology, the field of medicine, the field of neuroscience have advanced, and they have very specific meaning assigned to certain words like perception and consciousness. So the word consciousness today, if you were to ask a psychologist or a neuroscientist, it carries a very specific meaning. Consciousness really refers to the sense of self as well. So in other words, today when you talk to scientists, when you talk about consciousness, they're not just talking about being aware of objects, they are talking about being aware of a self in the world. So the word consciousness is a lot more complex and deeper than when it was first thought to be used. So a more accurate word to describe what is vijnana coming from the sense organ would be perception, perceiving objects in the environment through the sense organs. Right. So now let's take a look at the second part of the mental experience called Mano, the cognitive process.
Someone came and asked Buddha a question. We have these 5 senses, and each sense will give different information. The eye, the information we get from the eye is different from the information we get from the ear. It is a sound. And nose gives another kind of information. The tongue gives another kind of information. Now these different informations, they are different. But we mix these things together. Where does that mixing come? Where do they unite?
In the mind.
Then the Buddha said, Mano. Mano is the place. And today, if we use the modern scientific thinking, all these information going from the senses go to the brain. And the brain begins to do the thinking, put that information together and compare it with the past experiences and gives a meaning. So when I see a person coming here, if I have seen that person before, I will know that person. Or if I don't, at least I will see whether it is a man or a woman, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So the meaning is given by the thinking part, which is Mano, which is the activity of the brain. There is no thinker as a separate person. It is the brain, and there is a part of the brain called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex, which is doing the thinking. And Mano really is not another person there or anything, but the body itself. The brain is a part of the body.
So all these information coming in is processed by the brain, and it is the Mano that is processing it. So it's this second part of the mental experience, the Mano, the cognitive process, which is then putting all this information together, and then we become aware of a world out there. Whereas with each of the perception, Chakku Vijnana is only aware of what was perceived with the eye. Then you have sounds, which is perceived to the ear. Now, what is perceived to the ear is really, in a way, independent of what was perceived to the eye. But because of Mano, it puts it all together. Now we begin to form a complete picture. And this complete picture is the process called Mano Vijnana. And that is really consciousness. We become aware of a world out there. And when you become aware of a world out there, then that is the objective world. Then you also become aware of the notion of a subjective experience that you're experiencing. So this is really what's going on. And Bhante was saying that because we have this brain, actually I have to be careful the way I phrase it. I should rephrase it. Because there is a brain, because the sense organs, the nerves are connected to the brain, then there is an activity that is ongoing where the sense organs sending these impulses to the brain are being processed. These impulses are rising and falling, rising and falling, rising and falling. So this is a continuous process of impulses rising and falling, rising and falling. And this is really what produces the reaction in the brain, right? So therefore, we have to be careful not to identify that this body is me, this brain is me. Basically, it is this activity that produces what we call thinking or what we call consciousness, right? So from the sense organs, they are perceptions. And when they are put together, it is consciousness. So the vijnana of the 5 sense organs are really perceptions, and the vijnana of the Mano is really consciousness. So Mano Vijnana is actually consciousness. Consciousness of what? Consciousness of an objective world. Right? And then it produces the notion, the idea, or the concept of a subjective self. And this is why the mind begins to create the notion there is a self. Because there is a world, then there must be a self. So this is really the notion. But realize that it is really not the world and the self. It's really a continuous process of rising and falling of light stimulating the eye, sound stimulating the ear, all these impulses producing this rising and falling, rising and falling. That's really what is constantly going on, the rising and the falling. Anicca, that's all it is. And therefore, we have these 5 physical sense organs bringing in the information, and that is perception. And then putting it together is the Mano Vijnana, which is the cognition of the sense perception and being able to identify what was perceived, being able to recognize, meaning to be able to give it a name, recognize the mental image that arises by giving it a name. So the rupa arises in the mind and the nama is assigned to it. And then cognizing this experience, the Dhamma, with concepts. Along with concepts, we begin to have choices because concepts differ between one person and another person. Two people standing next to each other, looking at the same object in the same direction, the same object doing the same thing. The concept arising in the minds of these two different persons will be different, right? And the reaction will be completely different because the reaction also depends largely on the person's past experiences. If it was something that is pleasant to you, you will react in a pleasant way, right? A more peaceful or happier way. If it is something unpleasant to you, you will react in a more agitated way. So different people will have different reactions. So in the brain, basically the three parts of the brain, there is the survival brain, and then there is the emotional brain. I call it emotional brain because the limbic system is really triggering the beginning of emotional reaction. There is a structure in the limbic system that senses for threats. I'll come to that in a moment. And then it reacts and produces a chemical chain reaction, releasing hormones and various chemicals in the body. And of course, there is the thinking brain, the learning brain, the cerebral cortex. So this diagram is not a hard and fast diagram to say, oh, it's a black and white thing. It's not. Basically, I'm just pointing out that the nerves coming from the sense organs are entering the brain through the brain stem. That's why this part is associated with sensory perception or vijnana. So it's associated with vijnana. Doesn't mean that this is the part where vijnana is produced. No, that's not what I'm showing here. I'm showing which part of the brain is primarily associated with which mental experience. Then this part of the brain, the limbic system, is associated with the arising of emotional experience. And then, of course, thinking or learning arises with the cerebral cortex. As I mentioned before, right, deep in the limbic system, the emotional command center, there is a structure called the amygdala. So this has evolved over millions of years, and the amygdala is really sensing the environment. It is picking up all the sensory perceptions. That means everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, these signals pass through the amygdala first. And then the amygdala really is looking for signs of potential threat or danger to the organism. And when it senses something that appears to be a threat, it is activated, so it becomes agitated. It starts to produce a chain reaction, releasing stress hormones. And this process is called fight or flight reaction. The purpose of the amygdala is really to protect us from harm. I'll give you a simple example. If somebody standing in front of you, maybe 5-10 feet away, pick up a basketball and throw at you, it's heading towards your face. And all this is happening in a split second. Do you have time to look at the basketball coming towards you and then you think and say, there's a basketball coming towards my face. If I don't duck or get out of the way, it's going to hit my face. It will be very painful. So maybe I should either catch the ball or duck or move out of the way. Do you have time to do that? No, you don't, because it's the amygdala that is doing it for you. The amygdala is sensing, constantly sensing for various signs of threats and danger. For instance, fast approaching object, bright light, loud explosive sound, loud sound, and abrupt touches, abrupt actions. All this will trigger a chain reaction in the amygdala. So when it senses fast approaching object, the amygdala reacts and causes your muscles to tense up to do something, either to knock the ball out of the way, and that is called fight. So you're fighting it by challenging it, knocking the ball out of the way, or make you duck. So when you duck, it's called flight. You're fleeing, you're running away from the ball or trying to escape the ball. So it's actually producing these reactions, fighting it, which is to get rid of it or to stop it, or fleeing, to run away from it, to escape from the harm. That's why the amygdala is called a bodyguard, the bodyguard in the brain. However, the amygdala has a paradoxical role. There is also another opposite. Take, for example, we're sitting there reading a book peacefully, reading a Dhamma book peacefully, and then maybe your mother, your sister, or whoever has finished cooking. And instead of screaming out, "Oh, dinner is ready," the person just walk up to you quietly, coming from behind you, and touch you on the shoulder. What happens? You get spooked. That spooking reaction is the amygdala doing the reaction, because it senses an unexpected touch. So it reacts, thinking that it is some kind of a threat. So this is why the amygdala has a paradoxical role. When it senses something that appears to have the perception of a threat or conflict or danger, it arouses a chain reaction of releasing hormones and then triggering the arousal of emotions of fear, panic, anger, and so on. And therefore, the amygdala is also called a terrorist in the brain. So with the amygdala being reacting to what was sensed and perceived as though it is a threat, then the whole body changes. And that is actually the experience of dukkha, experience of suffering. So the amygdala really is responsible for a lot of experience of dukkha, because it's sensing something and then determining that, oh, it is a threat, and then it starts to react and causes these stress hormones and arousals of emotional states. And the stress hormone do some terrible things. So the amygdala sends a signal to the rest of the body, triggering this chain reaction where the brain sends the signal to various organs in the body, especially the glands. And it reaches the adrenal gland, which is located just above your kidneys. We got two of them, one on each side for a normal person. And the adrenal gland releases two very powerful hormones together with other hormones. But the two most distinct powerful hormones would be adrenaline and cortisol. And what do these hormones do? They cause various organs in the body to react in very special ways. For example, the heart rate beats faster, your blood pressure rises, and your breathing deepens, and your digestive system is suspended because it needs to release the energy to fight against the threat, so that it stops the digestive system, so that there is now enough energy in the body to react to the threat. And then your muscles are all getting tensed up. And at the same time, hair standing on end, your pupils dilating, opening up, and facial expression distorting, and also your body temperature rises and you may start to perspire. All these, you can see, it's happening to every one of us throughout the day. Right? And you can see hair standing on end, pupil dilating, muscles all tensed up, facial expression distorts. The funny thing is, the amygdala is also aroused in an instance where you are experiencing pleasure. Technically speaking, the reaction is almost the same. Whether it is a threat or it is something pleasurable, the amygdala is aroused and it produces the chain reaction. And then also releasing more sugar in the blood to help to carry out this metabolic rate, to convert stored energy into active energy so that you can either fight or run away from the threat. That's why it's called the fight or flight reaction. And this is really what is known as stress. And then the body immune system is suspended because the body immune system is trying to stop all these things happening. Therefore, the cortisol is so powerful, it suspends your body immune system to allow all these things to happen. Otherwise, your body immune system would go against all these stress reactions. So it's very unhealthy. Now let's take a look at this whole chain reaction called emotions. I call this the vicious cycle of emotions. You have activity in the environment stimulating all your sense organs. And these external stimulus are producing signals going to the brain, and then you become aware. The mind becomes aware, and it starts to interpret. What is this, right? And when it starts to interpret with a perception of threat or conflict, it actually triggers an emotional arousal, and together with it, this chain reaction, fight or flight reaction, the body becomes uncomfortable. So you can see this is the chain reaction, which is called the vicious cycle of emotion. A lot of people, they think that emotion is only in the mind. It's not. Emotion also affects the whole body. In fact, emotion begins with the manifestation of this physical stress reaction, that it is the release of these stress hormones. That is the beginning of an emotional chain reaction. Right? So this part is called the stress reaction. So the three parts of the mental experiences so far, being able to perceive the environment is vijnana, being able to interpret what has been perceived is the mano, and then comes the chitta, which is now experiencing feeling of whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, the vedana, and then reacting to it with tanha. Now, tanha is often translated as craving, but a more precise explanation of the meaning of tanha is really emotional reaction, because of the emotional urge to want to react, the temperament. Mood is the feeling whether it is pleasant or not pleasant, whether you like it, you don't like it, you feel good, you don't feel good. That is the mood. Temperament is the urge to react. So therefore, that reaction. I will talk more about this when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, this tanha. Okay. So at the same time, we begin to personalize the experience. We have cognized the experience, and now we begin to personalize that experience. The Mano has cognized the experience. It is the Chitta that is now personalizing the experience, Upadana. And this leads to the notion of a self-centered existence and Bhavatanha. This self-centered existence thinking that I like this, I don't like this, I hate this, I enjoy this. So the I, me, or mine becomes very strong. And if it is something that you enjoy or like, it is mine, right? And therefore, this is this self-centered existence, this notion of self-centered existence arising. So these are the three parts of mental experiences. Let's now look at the last one, the affective process, the emotions.
Once you have given a meaning to what you saw, an emotion is aroused. That means you like that thing that you saw, or you hate that, or you are frightened of that, or you are worried about that. These are the emotions. And that emotional part is what the Buddha called chitta. So chitta is the emotional part, and according to the emotion that is aroused, an action takes place in the form of speech or behavior. And that is what is called karma. Karma is the action that goes. And the action can also have results, which may be, if you become angry and you begin to fight with people, other people might fight with you also. Or you might be taken to prison. These are things.
Effects.
Yeah. So those are the consequences of the action. So that is the vipaka. So all these things are just the body doing these things. There is no person or any mind as a separate thing that is doing anything.
So now this arousal of emotion, what starts it all? It's actually producing the first sign of emotional reaction, that is stress. So what makes us stress? Now, basically, a lot of things make us stress, but I have generally grouped them into three major groups of activities in the environment. First is emotional encounters. We call them trauma. When you encounter something that arouses these emotions strongly, or experiencing something that is traumatic, maybe an accident, maybe someone dearly beloved person has passed away, and so on. So experiencing of trauma is an emotional encounter. So this is the first thing. This is a very powerful, very strong thing. And then experiencing of failures or disappointments or things not working out according to plan, adversities, problems, adversities, difficulties, troubles, and so on. When you encounter something, try to do something, it doesn't work. And that is also another group of activities that arouses emotions in a very strong way. And the third one, of course, we know is anicca, uncertainties. And that leads to various confusion or being lost or perplexed. Basically, things are changing and unexpectedly, unfamiliar circumstances, unexpected events arising, perplexity, confusion, unable to decide, indecisiveness, or even boredom, which is what a lot of us are experiencing these past few months because of the coronavirus during lockdown, staying at home. We were experiencing this boredom. So imagine people were getting very depressed. So many people have come across, I hear a lot, and I also have a few friends, became very depressed as a result of this lockdown, right? Because of the boredom, right? They are not used to staying at home, being locked down. And there are so many people now, as I speak, even some of my friends, they are experiencing all kinds of depression because of the boredom, the lockdown. So 3 major categories, but let's now look at specifics, things that is happening almost throughout the day, constantly. I'll give you some example. I'll call them the inevitable realities of modern life. Environmental activities, a lot of things are going on. We see, hear, smell, taste, and touch a lot of things. Environmental activities are constantly stimulating our sense organs, bombarding our attention system, right? We must pay attention. Take, for example, you're driving down the highway. You have to watch the cars cutting in because everybody is trying to cut in front of you. So therefore, you have to be very attentive. And that is draining a lot of energy from you, paying attention because of all the things that are going on, the sounds, the sights and the smells and so on. And circumstances, things we are surrounded with, they keep changing, anicca, becoming unpredictable, causing uncertainties and insecurities. Right? And people around us, our friends, not so much our friends, in fact, it's our relatives, our children, our parents, our siblings, right? And our teachers, our bosses, our servants, our employees, our associates, our partners, they impose demands and expectation upon us. And therefore, we have to respond. They're putting a lot of pressure on us to respond. So these are things that we constantly experience day in and day out. And of course, we are also experiencing deadlines and schedules. They lead to a lot of stress and it drains a lot of energy because in order to respond to the schedule, we get very tired from it. And of course, obstacles, challenges, difficulties, they arise to hinder our planned activities unexpectedly, and they disrupt our peace of mind. What do all these things do to us? What do all these things do to the mind? They produce a perception of threats. See, the mind begins to perceive them and interpret these kinds of things as some kind of threat. And when it interprets it as a threat, it triggers a chain reaction, an emotional chain reaction, releasing hormones and causing the body to react, and then the mind getting disturbed. Let's look at this vicious cycle more clearly. What is really going on? So when you have these things going on around us, environmental activities going on and stimulating our sense organs, and if it is something unpleasant or something unexpected or something going wrong, we begin to perceive them with threat or conflict. And when you start to perceive that, it triggers a chain reaction, emotional chain reaction, arousing emotions and causing fight or flight reactions in the body to happen. The hormones released. Now the body is very tensed. Now, when this is happening, it actually disturbs the mind. It now interferes with your thinking because you have no more peace of mind. So this stress reaction interferes with your thinking and disturbs the thinking. We call this the mental disturbance. So the physical changes is called stress. The mental disturbance is called distress. Distress is really referring to this psychological hindrance, psychological disturbance, the mental disturbance. And when that happens, it actually causes us to, when we react without thinking, in other words, if we don't analyze what's going on and we straight away react, we tend to react with habitual emotional reactions. And that means we begin to react in a very strong way, unskillful way. Now, we have to be careful. We have to stop all this before it gets there. In fact, it can even get worse than that. When we are not able to stop it at this stage, and now we are what we call becoming very emotional. Now we are starting to scream at the top of our voice. We start to tense up. We start to take up a fighting stance and all that, All this is happening in us. And we begin to personalize this experience and say, I am getting angry. I am hateful. I hate this thing. The I, me, or mind becomes very strong. And then the mind goes into a state of what we call mental proliferation. Mental proliferation is when the mind begins to draw from memory, imagination, expectations, running wild. And this is really causing a lot of cognitive distortions, the mind being disturbed with all kinds of thoughts. And this is really getting out of control. And this is when people go into depression. And they even can become suicidal. So this is really the emotional chain reaction we should avoid. I'll talk more about this in the next sharing when we get into the Four Noble Truths, and also the one after that when we get into the Eightfold Way, how we can address all this using the teachings of the Buddha from the Buddha Dhamma. Right? They are very useful techniques that the Buddha has taught us how to help ourselves with all this. So quickly then, we have these three parts of mental experiences. The vijnana, which is the perception of what was perceived through the sense organs, is called perception, perceiving. Then you have mano, which is cognizing, being able to interpret what has been perceived. And then creating concepts, conceiving, and stories. And then along with concepts, we have choices. And finally, there is this chitta, which is the emotional reaction to feelings, right? Feeling whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant, right? This affective process. And we begin to react to it. So there is this emotional urge making us want to react, and then we cling on to the reaction, personalizing, upadana. And then because we have this notion of a self-centered existence, the I, me, or mine is very strong. All this is because of the chitta. So these are the three parts of the mental experiences. I will connect this with the Four Noble Truths when I come to the Four Noble Truths. So let's now look at it one more time. We have all this going on and how they play in. This part where external activities stimulate our sense organs, that is the vijnana. And when we become aware, right, when the mind becomes aware of objects, it begins to interpret. That is the mano, the cognitive process. And when it interprets with the perception of threat and conflict, then emotions are aroused. That is really the chitta, triggering a chain reaction in the body, which is stress. Hormonal chain reaction, now stress. The body is all tense. So the chitta is the beginning of this emotional arousal. And stress is dukkha. It is pain. It's painful, it's suffering. And when we experience dukkha, it disturbs the mind. The mind cannot think, there's no peace of mind. And we begin to react. And this reaction leads to clinging, upadana. And the reaction is tanha, emotional reaction. and the clinging is upadana. So now you can see this whole chain reaction going on. I call this the vicious cycle of emotions. In the next two sharing, I'm going to go into transforming vicious cycle of emotions into virtuous cycle of compassion, right? So here, I'm just stressing on this because with this 1 hour, we don't have a great deal of time to go anything further than this. So all these experiences of suffering is the manifestation of dukkha. Now, unfortunately, the word dukkha has always been translated as the word suffering. And that has created a lot of misconception of what the Buddha was trying to teach. You see, a lot of people who are not really familiar with the teachings of the Buddha, they hear people talking about Buddhism is always talking about dukkha. And then they start to say, oh, Buddhism is so pessimistic. But actually, that is a misconception. Buddhism is really not pessimistic. I'll give you a more down-to-earth example. Take, for example, you are maybe experiencing some illness. You wake up one morning and you feel maybe a sore throat and your fever, and you know that you're actually now feeling this temperature and the fever. You take some Panadol, it doesn't work. So what do? You go and see the doctor. Hopefully that the doctor can then diagnose what's wrong with you. So you go to see the doctor, and then the doctor diagnose what's wrong with you, and then give you some medicine. It could be antibiotic, or it could be a stronger painkiller or something. It gives you the medicine, and then you go home and you take the medicine. After taking the medicine, now you feel better. You are recovering. So you're recovering from your sickness. Now, ask yourself, what is your perception of what the doctor does? Do you think the doctor is the one who is bringing you suffering, bringing you illness? Or do you think the doctor is the person who is helping to cure you of your illness, helping you to recover from your illness? In the same way, the Buddha came and spoke about dukkha, right? Spoke about the arising of dukkha and how it affects us, spoke about the causes behind the dukkha, the origins of dukkha. But he also went on to speak about dukkha can be ended. It can be brought to an end, the ending of dukkha. And he also taught us the way leading to the ending of dukkha. So in that sense, the Buddha was like a doctor, actually a psychotherapist, a more accurate word, a psychotherapist, because it's all about the way we cultivate our mind. So what Buddhism is all about is not dukkha, but freedom from dukkha. So in other words, what the Buddha taught is not about suffering, but about being free from it, freedom from suffering, cessation of suffering. Right? So the word dukkha also means a whole lot of other things. If it is something that is uncertain, we feel insecure about it. If it is something not as we want, we feel dissatisfied about it. These are dukkha. Dissatisfactoriness, insecurity, these are dukkha. There's also other things which are really dukkha. Pain, sorrow, grief, lamentation, so on, fear, frustration, unhappiness, any form of unhappiness, that's dukkha. Trauma, agony, anguish, depression, stress, distress, confusion, boredom, perplexity. All these are various manifestations of dukkha. Right? And the Buddha taught a lot of techniques to help us overcome that. And if we are able to completely bring it to an end, then we would be on the path of attaining Nibbana. Because in the third noble truth, the Buddha talked about the ending of dukkha, and that is really attaining Nibbana. Okay, so that will be the next sharing that I'm going to talk about, that there is dukkha, and that there are reasons why dukkha arises, the origin of dukkha, and all that can be brought to an end, and then the way leading to the ending of dukkha. That will be the next sharing. So basically, with this sharing, I'm reaching the end of this sharing. So I have here a link which you can then download all the slides you have seen. So you can, if you're using a phone to watch this, Then you can take a snapshot, and then you have the link. Or if you're watching on your computer, pick up your phone and take a picture. Then you have the link, KCBA Mind. tiny.cc/KCBA-mind. And please post your questions in the comments. And also, after all the sharing is over, if you have, after all this session is over, you have further questions, feel free to email to me or connect with me through Facebook. But meanwhile, let's handle some of the questions we have today. So over to you, Eileen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Billy Tan. At this moment, there's no comments from the Facebook. Apparently, your message is very clear. And on the moderate pace, I have a question for myself.
Okay.
Which would like to ask you about the emotional trauma that you mentioned just now. Right? Just looking at the situation, right, and also a few example. Sometimes the emotional trauma can be due to, from the extreme fear, disgust, or you hate your family member or person that you know for no reason.
Yes.
Right. So, well, people will conveniently say that it is, maybe it could be your past life. so then again, we also heard that, people resort to hypnotherapy.
Yes.
Yeah, in this sense, right, the hypnotherapy treatment, in that case, when a people is going for such treatment, which part of the emotion or sensory that are being triggered or involved?
Yeah. Basically, the problem is really emotions as a whole. And emotion is a big thing. And as I mentioned, it can be triggered, it can be agitated or aroused in a number of ways. And you mentioned some ways. It's maybe a partner you don't like, or a relative, or whatever. Hypnotherapy is really something that helps you to calm down very quickly. Right? Well, not say very, but it takes a few sessions. And so that your mind is detached. It's a way of helping you to detach your mind from the problem. Hypnotherapy does not solve your problem. If you have a problem with your partner, hypnotherapy is not going to solve your relationship problem. But it will help you not feel so fearful, not feel so sad or angry over a poor relationship. It will help you, and hypnotherapy itself is just calming. You need to combine it with neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro-linguistic programming is to train your mind to look at things from a different perspective, to reprogram the way you think about it. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I used to have I was in my early 30s. I worked for a company, a foreign company that was paying very well. The salary was super good, twice as much as the average person of my same qualification. So I didn't want to leave that company, but I was transferred to a department where the boss, a local guy, he was very show-offy and very always showing his temper. When you do something wrong, oh, he shouts at you, even use foul language. When you do something right, he never says thank you. So every time he screams, and even my female colleagues, they were all very fearful. They were even in tears. But I changed the way I think. I changed the way I interpreted the circumstances. Whenever he shouted at me, in my mind, I said to myself, oh, gorilla escaped from the zoo. So when I think like that, I start to think, oh, there you are, shouting again. In my mind, I'm thinking, this guy is shouting again like a gorilla escaping from the zoo. And then it makes me feel better. This is really changing the way you perceive something. So when someone is screaming at you, don't think of it as he is trying to hurt me, because you are causing hurt to yourself again. First, he said something unpleasant. You felt hurt. Now you start to think, he is trying to hurt my feelings. And the more you think about that, you are repeating the hurt over and over again. But neuro-linguistic program help you to relook at it. When someone is being nasty to you, there could be a reason. That person may be experiencing something himself that is worse than you. So think of it that that person has a problem, not you. He is insulting you, but you're not the one with the problem. He's the one with the problem. So neuro-linguistic program has a number of ways to help you, what we call reframe. Reframe means to change the way you look at things and now look at it in a more positive way. So when my boss was shouting at me, screaming at me, for me, it's just a gorilla escaped from the zoo. I don't feel anything. It puts a smile on my face. And then he starts to wonder, wow, this guy, despite him screaming at me, I'm still smiling, So you free yourself from the suffering by detaching from the problem. So you need to learn to detach the problem. Hypnotherapy will help you detach and relax. Neuro-linguistic programming will help you detach and change the way you perceive it, right? So that's it.
I'm also curious that, whether you could, explain why you fear of something like, maybe like fear of height or fear of some animal, so I'm not too sure whether this hypnotherapy, because people tend to talk about hypnotherapy, you can actually see your past lives and why is that so, you see, so just curious. All right. So that, yeah. So there's another question, yeah. Please hold on.
Janet Ang from
Yeah.
Philippines.
Question from Janet Ang. How to accept and influence your family member because they are the one causing your stress?
Okay, that's interesting.
Which also applies the same to me as well.
Yeah. It is important to remember that the Buddha taught us how to be peaceful. The Buddha taught us to help ourselves first, and then only we're able to help the people around us. Self-compassion first, and then we are able to practice compassion towards others. We are not here to change the world. We're not here to change other people. So what we can do is that when someone is doing something that hurts us, we should find a way to express to that person, not as, oh, now I'm angry, I'm hurt. You are hurting me. This you, me, is going to make it worse. What you should then get people to do is that when somebody is saying things or doing things to hurt you, then you look at it. What is it that is going on that is causing a problem? What is the problem? You see, what the person thinks of you is never the problem, but it is always what other people think of you that causes them to behave in unusual ways. So if somebody were to say nasty words to you, the best response is to ask that person, why are you saying that? What is it that I have done to hurt you? What is it that I have done to cause a problem? What is the problem? So when you're able to identify what is the problem, it reduces this conflict. Trying to change people, that creates more conflict because people, especially adults, they are not going to change. You can teach children, but it's near impossible to teach adults because when people have a certain ways, it's not easy to try to teach them. So don't try to change other people. Change the way you perceive what they do to you so that you can bring more peace and calm to yourself. And the funny thing is that if you are more peaceful when somebody is angry with you or is trying to hurt you and you respond in a peaceful way, it actually reduces, firstly, your own suffering. And secondly, it actually causes the other person to rethink. I give you that same example in that office where my boss was always shouting. When I started to think gorilla escaped from the zoo, it puts a smile on my face. And then he starts to see this guy, when he tries to shout, when he tries to shout at me, I'm still smiling. He becomes less and less inclined to shout at me anymore in the future. And the important thing is now respond with kindness. So in my case, what I did was whenever things are calm, things are quiet, my boss not shouting anymore, I want to make a cup of coffee during tea break. I walk up to the boss and say, hey, boss, how about I make you a cup of coffee? Would you like a cup of coffee? I'll make you one. So when you do things like that, responding with kindness, people begin to change the way they look at you. If they are nasty to you, they start to think, oh, this guy is such a nice guy. I shouldn't be so nasty to you. That kind of thing. So we're not here to change people. We're here to change ourselves. We are only here to try to identify what is a problem and how we can solve a problem. And we can't change how people think about us. We can only project a different perspective, a different view, a view of compassion and kindness towards other people, right? Gratitude, kindness, and forgiveness. These are the three things. Forgiveness deals with something that's in the past. Gratitude deals with something that is in the present. Be grateful for what you have. And kindness really paved the way for a more peaceful and happier future. So that's what we can do. Change ourselves, not try to change other people. Okay?
There's also another question coming in from Duga Cause. If our ear sense door is more sensitive, will it be
Mhm.
better for us to be trained in jungle rather than normal environment?
Yeah, if you want to have training and your ears are always picking up all kinds of sound, being very sensitive, yeah, you are easily disturbed. So you need to have a more peaceful place. And of course, going to a remote place, free from all the noise and hustle bustle of modern life, that can help a lot with helping to train the mind. But do be aware, training the mind is not just freeing yourself of attachment to the noise by detaching, going to another place. Because when you go back to the city, you're going to experience the suffering all over again. So it's cultivating a mind where you detach from the suffering. You're detaching from being hurt by the noise. You can't detach from the noise. You come back to the city, you will hear all the honking and the shouting and the screaming and the TV blasting, right? If not from your house, could be from a neighbor's house. You can't detach from that, but you can detach from your feeling, your perception of it, and the way you respond to it. So it's really about cultivating internally to help yourself detach from suffering, not detach from the cause, because you can't detach from the cause. Okay. All right.